Hi, this is Dr. Maya Dodd. One of the best use cases for the digital humanities has been building local histories, and this has been particularly popular by communities as well as experts from all kinds of places. There is massive interest in memorializing places, and this is particularly true in the case of architecture. We see many cases around the world and in India in terms of the effort by local historians as well as citizens to come together to do this. So in the case of Deco in Delhi, it's a small team of 2 persons who attempted to capture what were the buildings designed in the style of Art Deco in the city of Delhi. And this is something that was a very lean operation, but has managed to create some sort of entry point into honoring that legacy. Similarly, in the case of Deco in Bombay also, there has been a wide variety of actors who've come together to create this archive of the city. I will speak really about this one digital archive that is a bit different from these 2 cases for the reason that this is a post-custodial archive. The effort was not actually to create a physical repository of all the materials that would be properly assigned to the history of the 20th century of Pune city, but there was access gained to many of these materials in order to create a digital display of how we could look back at the 20th century in terms of the buildings of Pune. The Pune Architecture History Archive, also known as PAHA, which means to see in Marathi, has been made possible with university funding and is an initial attempt at inviting all variety of audiences, specifically, of course, architecture students, but really anybody with a history in the city. So in many ways, it is offering a very public possibility of what digital archives do. And the website is free and open to all variety of users. There are oral histories, there are spatial ways in which the city has been rendered, and more. The team that made for PAHA consisted of 3 academics, myself, Maya, as well as Sarah Melzins, who was a postdoctoral fellow at Flame University, and Dr. Pushkar Sohni, who has been an art historian and himself a trained architect who teaches at ISER Pune. Through a workflow that entailed identification of materials, the hiring of third-party persons to digitize this material and more. The project spanned over 2 years, but essentially has been presented as a gift to the city, meaning it's a start point as a digital entry point to thinking about local histories differently. To give you a sense of how this looks, these are some of the materials that were in possession by different architects in the city, and through memoranda of understanding and other agreements, we were able to gain access to correspondences, bills, photographs, and of course architectural plans. That material amounted to over 8,000 digital items, and so it took a vendor sort of series of about 6 months to get this material into digital format. Now, depending upon the intended display, that digital format could be rendered in different sort of degrees of compression. Europeana, for instance, has a set of specifications which would be intended for certain benefits. We rendered mostly everything in the highest resolution possible, and this took a lot of work as far as identifying what kind of sizes these different objects came from. But more importantly, I think the creation of the metadata for every single object has been the challenge and the task. And this is where the scholarly use of expertise makes a digital archive more or less meaningful than sort of just a collection of objects. The metadata work continues, and the interesting sort of future of this would be to crowdsource it and annotate it with additional comments from public. Legal permissions are also a very challenging aspect in terms of gaining access to materials like this. As you can imagine, architectural drawings are considered intellectual property, and there was a sense of challenge in terms of saying, why should folks put this out there in the public domain? The answer, of course, was for historical salience, and all the material was licensed under Creative Commons licensing. So there was a sort of assurance given to the architects that legal permissions, should be abided by all publics who come and access this. There were different aspects to this project, including the choice of which system we should use. We went with Omeka, and Omeka is not a frequently used, even though it's an open source platform, it's not a very heavily used one in India. So in many ways, that itself was challenging because the user community is not a wider base. In universities across the world, it has been sort of more adopted, but the faith is that if we use open access tools, we will sort of multiply actually the expertise also for this work. So in terms of comparing which repository system to use, in terms of supervising the digitization, there were often instances where the quality of the digitized image was not actually acceptable, and often we had to go back to the table to get this done from scratch. So this sort of quality control, etc., was a joint effort, but it required really supervision at all stages. So before, during, and after was unavoidable. In the meantime, there was also the attempt to sort of give life to these repositories. And so doing oral histories, recording videos of many of the architects who are now often in their 80s and above was considered, meaningful, and often gave a flavor of a very personal style and stories behind these objects, behind these buildings, which often are not captured by the metadata. So in that regard, there was a complementarity to looking not just at the history of this city's architectural history as that of buildings, but really that of persons who go ahead to make these buildings. And those persons are not just the architects, they're also the contractors, they're also the workers. So there are companion projects to this project, but for the digital archive part, it was sort of focused on the oral histories and the digitization of these objects. So as I mentioned, the training really required, and this is something that digital humanities scholars often struggle with, which is how much do I need to know before I do something? The fact of the matter is you will learn on the job. And there are a ton of resources out there that will help you get there. So for instance, in terms of oral history, this is a website, ohs.org, that can help you think about everything from consent forms to the quality of the audio that you capture. In terms of digital archiving, I'll mention other resources at the end that also help you think through your workflow and those sorts of aspects. As I mentioned, the what format should I use is a function of what you're comfortable with also. The Deco in Delhi project literally used Notion to scale up their entire effort. In the case of PAHA, we used Omeka. And as I mentioned, we did have to lean on other sorts of experts to help us through this, but it helps to be part of a global community of setting standards in terms of what we created. So to look at some other websites that represent these efforts around the world, the one that I find very, very inspiring, in addition to thematic ones, are of course geographically situated ones. This one, which is called Reframing Imperial War, is looking at sites around the world. So it's not necessarily about one specific space. But if you look at, for instance, the New Haven Building Archive, it's a very tiny city. It's the city in which Yale University resides. They have literally implanted plaques on the buildings, and in this digital interface, you can zoom in through the map to see where those buildings are. So there is an online offline complementarity to how this building archive was imagined. Meanwhile, when you look at something like the religious architecture of Bengal site, Sujan Mukherjee, who has been instrumental in making this site alive, himself actually is an archivist, but more importantly was also a user of Omeka. So we leaned on his expertise for certain troubleshooting and things. This is a rarer site in many ways for the fact that it's a scholarly archive, and you may have seen several sort of tourism, travel-based, place-based archives, but this is different because of the, again, quality of the metadata and the annotation about the reliefs and different sort of aspects of what religious architecture in India looks like. This, of course, is in the case of Bengal. As I mentioned previously, the Art Deco Mumbai project is very significant for the reason that it actually has not just created sort of history, but it's also putting back the memory of that history in the city. So there is a plaque in the Oval. There is another one that faces Marine Drive, and this is literally facing the Art Deco buildings that sort of guide the viewer into what is the historical salience of these places. I think that is one of the reasons to make digital archives, is because India is so phone friendly that if you can sort of spatially locate a place and actually zoom in and actually get much more information about what you're seeing, it goes a long way into consolidating a sense of local history.